approved as is. At this point in the agenda, we have a presentation by Mr. Harrison and members of the Goldenberg group on the subject of the TIF.
Welcome, Mr. Harrison.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sundberg. My name is Tim Harrison. As I have to admit, I'm a developer from Staten Island, New York, although in defense, I will say both of my children were born in Harrisburg Hospital, and my wife and I lived in Harrisburg for 10 years until my wife was transferred to Staten Island, and I was transferred too. I want to introduce to you some people who are with me tonight. Jeremy Fogel will be sharing the presentation from the Goldenberg Group of Bell, Pennsylvania. Kevin Trapper in the second row, also from the Goldenberg Group. Amy Kaufman in the second row from Delta Development of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And Joe Hogan from Mullen and Lonergan Associates in Huntington Valley, Pennsylvania. I wanted to start with an update on the Hamilton Crossings project. The Hamilton Crossings project is a large retail project. I actually began work on the project in 2008, filed a preliminary plan involving a Target and a Lowe's in early 2009. Then, as all of us remember only too well, the economy slipped into recession. Lowe's terminated its new store development program, and the project was in severe jeopardy. I continued working on it with Lower Macungie Township, attempting to craft a project that would be acceptable to the township and at the same time financially viable. And in order to make the project work, the bottom line was it needed to be much larger and more densely developed than the township ordinances allow. Eventually, we came up with a plan that looked something like this. This is approximately 580,000 square feet on 62 acres. The anchor tenants are Costco, Target, ShopRite. There are various junior anchors, restaurants, and other small retailers that are part of the project. In February 2011, Lower Macungie Township granted a package of 28 zoning variances that were needed to accommodate a project of this kind of density. And actually, since that time, we've had to make substantial revisions to the plan to accommodate Costco, and more important, to accommodate some very severe geotechnical issues that we uncovered on the site. The project involves a total investment of over $120 million. It will employ more than 1,000 people. It will involve more than 400 construction jobs. Our projections are that the project will generate real estate taxes for the school district of somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.2 to $1.4 million per year, although I must caution that those are our projections. Ultimately, the projections will be done by, not by us, but by a TIF committee in consultation with the county assessor. However, we do believe our projections are conservative and make sense. The project is a higher-end shopping center. It involves a degree of architecture, amenities, landscaping that are much more similar to the promenade shops in Saucon Valley than to any shopping centers in Lower Macungie Township. The project also involves some rather significant road improvements, the most important of which is the construction of a service road along the Route 222 bypass from approximately this location west of Crocs Road to the intersection of Crocs Road, and then past the intersection of Crocs Road, maybe 2,000 linear feet in total. In effect, what this does is provide direct access to the project from eastbound traffic on the bypass, and also, in effect, add the third through lane to the bypass, thereby increasing its capacity. The project also involves a regional stormwater detention facility that will handle flooding problems that occur today from a drainage area of more than 400 acres. What we discovered in extensive geotechnical studies that my partners at the Goldenberg Group Commission and Costco Commission earlier this year is very, very severe problems that, although you wouldn't know it walking by this site, really make it an industrial brownfield. This site beginning before the Civil War, was the site of an open pit iron mine. It's called Joseph Bastian's mine. And that mine operated on and off until the 1940s, a period of more than 70 years. There was also located on the site a facility which used a water source that was adjacent to the site to separate the iron ore, which was mined on the site, from the sediment in which it was embedded. And that sediment, once it was washed away from the iron ore, was just used to fill in mining holes. It wasn't compacted and obviously not regulated. Our problem is we now have over 185,000 cubic yards of that sediment on the site, located approximately here. And to make that 185,000 cubic yards a little bit more comprehensible, that's 333,000 tons of material, or to put it another way, 50,000 dump truck loads. The material has no structural strength whatsoever. It's in a highly saturated state. It has the consistency of pancake batter, so that any weight that's put on the material causes it to expand horizontally. Anyway, and what our geotechnical reports, just to give you some idea of the scope of them, they're in this rather weighty volume. What our geotechnical reports have all recommended is that buildings be moved out of the mine wash. The mine wash be extracted, all 50,000 dump truck loads, 333,000 tons, extracted from the ground, mixed with cement or a stone, maybe 50-50, put back in the ground in 1 foot lifts once it's dried out and compacted. And we've got depths of this stuff that exceed 24 feet. There was no provision in the pro forma for this kind of extraordinary remediation cost. And frankly, this project is not viable. Actually, this site, this 60-acre site, is now in the clean and green zone. It generates real estate tax of about $7,000 a year. And our belief, informed by these geotechnical reports, is that the site will forever remain in an undeveloped state. without this kind of remediation. Absolutely nothing of any weight can be built on this site. There's another problem that we have that's unique to this site, which is there is massive deposits of limestone, which geotechnical engineers call karst, K-A-R-S-T, really means limestone, that underlay this site. And 80 years of open pit mining, repeated explosions and disturbance involved with 80 years of open pit mining, have fractured 60 acres of karst to the point where it's impossible to build on it, even once the mine wash is remediated. And to make matters even more difficult, the mine wash itself, which is so saturated, has been dripping water slowly and incessantly onto the limestone for 80 years. When water interacts with limestone, it dissolves it. So we have a lattice of rock underneath the mine wash that won't support buildings here. Are there geotechnical solutions to this? Yes. I read in the Morning Call an article a couple weeks ago about similar problems associated with the hockey arena downtown, which had a single problem. They're using 1,600 micropiles to support that, at least according to the Morning Call, to support that structure. That's one remediation technique that's been recommended here. There are others as well, and we're sorting through that now. But suffice it to say, for present purposes, it's extraordinarily costly, and the project simply cannot be developed without this remediation, whether it's our project or any other project. In addition, the transportation network that we're putting in here to support the project is extremely costly. It will benefit the project, but it will also benefit the community as well because of the additional capacity that we're adding to the road. Now I'm going to yield my time to Jerry Vogel, who's a much more articulate, intelligent person than I am, to go through the TIF process that we'd like to consider. Thank you. Good evening.
As Tim outlined, I guess good evening, my name is Jeremy Vogel, the Golden Brook Group. As Tim outlined, we basically have a kind of simple situation. We have a project that we think has a lot of merit. It is something that we do in terms of our real estate focus in building commercial shopping centers and try to do in-house with our own finances when possible. This particular site presents the problems that Tim outlined and creates a solution in terms of the types of funding that we can identify to try to bridge a financial gap that exists here. The tax increment financing structure is something that is often misunderstood. It's not something that is applicable in all circumstances, and we're here tonight just to be informative and ask the board to consider the concept. We have some information to share with you about what it is, and hope that we can come back again and talk about it in more detail. But in general, when we look at a tax increment financing, the main test is actually called a but-for test. And you are supposed to look at the piece of property and identify whether you think it can develop on its own, or will it only develop but for some financing. This property has been in an extremely developing township for a long time. It's in the center of its commercial core. It's currently owned by the Archdiocese of Allentown, and as Tim indicated, it only throws off about $7,000 in taxes a year. Based on the physical limitations that we've identified, it's our position that the reason it hasn't been developed is because of these issues. People have slowly investigated this property over the years for different uses and have slowly come to the conclusion, probably not after doing as much of an extensive investigation as we have, but they clearly understood that there's a major barrier to developing this property physically, and it's prevented anything of any substance from happening here. And but for us coming up with some solutions on how to bridge this gap, this project will continue to throw off $7,000 a year. And I think that it's important for the public to understand that, because as the public will say, and as was pointed out, I think nicely by the gentleman to begin with this beginning discussion about the project, if the project would easily happen otherwise, sometimes it's not appropriate to have the public get involved in the financing of a project. This is a case where we feel otherwise. We think it's extremely appropriate. We think that the taxes that will be used if the groups that have been involved agree only come from the project and from no other source. They only come from the real estate tax that we generate with the project that we create. So the increment and TIF reference, whatever the actual assessment is, it's only a portion of those new taxes that would be used for the project. And the township, the town school, and the county, in this case the township doesn't have a local tax, so the school and the county would each have a significant increase in their share of the taxes from the project than they would otherwise. So there is a win-win for everyone to achieve here if the project is able to move forward. And if not, obviously, what would happen is our project would not be able to move forward, and the tenants that are looking to go here would just go elsewhere. We believe at this point the tenants that we're talking to would move far afield, and obviously everybody locally would suffer that loss to the extent that that was important to them. There's a number of sources that we're trying to receive these monies from. We are not relying locally on the school district. We have made a number of applications for funding from the state. We are working with the governor's office for some sources for some of the road improvements and some of the other issues that we have on the project. And we are looking only to ask the county and the township and the school to work with us to bridge whatever gap is left at the end of that effort. It's hard to know exactly what the gap will be. We think we've started to define that, but the purpose of our step on the TIF is to ask for a committee. That's the first step in the process. And if the school would be so willing, a board would be established, a TIF committee, which would involve folks from all of those different groups and also including the Lehigh County Industrial Development Authority. And we would work together to try to identify exactly what the gap is, what a reasonable projection of the revenue from the project would be, how a bond could be floated by the Industrial Development Authority to help finance some of the construction costs, and the exact details of how that works out. The TIF committee's job is to work through that process and come up with a recommendation. They then come back to all the boards with that recommendation so that the folks on the boards can have a chance to understand exactly what they're looking at and decide whether they think is appropriate. So really what we're asking for is for this board just to be aware that the process is something we'd like them to consider. We'd like you to have some information that I want to talk about, and then we'll come back again. One of the handouts we have for you is an outline that was prepared by the solicitor of the LCIDA, John Lucius. It's kind of a how-to for TIFs, and it's something that he drafted that we found is very helpful in trying to understand the TIF. And again, I don't believe the school district has been involved with a TIF, so please don't take this as a condescending discussion. It's really just trying to give information for something that, if you haven't been involved in, can be quite confusing. We've also brought with us an outline of some of the TIFs that have been put into place inside the Commonwealth. It is a vehicle that's been involved since the 70s. It's something that is used routinely throughout the country. Pennsylvania does it quite often. There's been a number of TIFs that have been used in this area. And so we brought some examples of TIFs that have been put into place, how they've been used, and then how the different governing bodies have participated. And then lastly, we brought with us a chart that kind of explains the process so that you can become familiar with the different legislative steps that need to be taken before a TIF can take effect. So again, the first step is to have a TIF committee established to look at the project as a whole and determine whether they think that that TIF is even worth discussing, and then under what terms that would happen. So today, again, is really just an informational meeting. The project itself, we think, is excellent from a retail perspective. We think that the tenants that are looking to come to this project are among the best in the types of tenants that we deal with. So as far as an asset, we would look at it to be first class and something that most communities would be very excited about having in terms of having a tax base that would be augmented by national credit retailers as well as some local different retailers. So the community, we believe, would be looking at having a project that would have some new retailers that are not here, some new restaurants and other uses that many people will find that they're looking to have. We think that it will generate a number of taxes and benefits like jobs and taxes beyond just the real estate taxes that would go to the benefit of all the parties involved. And then of the TIF itself, the increment that would be generated will be significantly more than the amount that we would ask be involved in helping to finance the construction costs, so that there's an economic win as well. It's a general summary. Any questions, please?
Well, let's start off by finding out if the board wishes to
particular of either of the gentlemen.
Yes. I just want to restate in my own words to make sure that I have the understanding. The parcel in question currently generates about $7,000 in real estate taxes for the school district. We're proposing to develop the parcel, and the financial assistance you are looking to receive is really from the taxes the parcel itself would generate. So if indeed TIF financing goes through, the school district that currently receives $7,000 for that parcel would have the opportunity to receive probably several $100,000 more from the same parcel.
And that, if I could expand on that, what I left out is too much detail. I don't know how much detail we'll get in tonight, but ultimately what would happen if everybody was going to move forward is the Lehigh County Industrial Development Authority would spearhead the process. These kind of projects go through an authority like that. So the TIF committee hopefully would include members from that group, the school, the township, and the county, and ourselves. And ultimately would identify exactly how many taxes, based on work with the assessor's office, would be created from the project. And again, just as you said, only a portion of the taxes from this project could be used. So we would then ultimately ask the county authority to float bonds that would take payment from a portion of the real estate taxes to maintain those bonds. And then the present value of those would be provided for construction costs. The school district would have no liability whatsoever. The school district would have no responsibility whatsoever. And at this step, all we're asking the school to do is join a committee. If the school, actually tonight, frankly, we're not even asking for that. We will be coming back to formally ask that. We're not asking that tonight, but when we do, the school will have no responsibility if they join the committee and decide that they don't like the idea, or if the committee comes to conclusions that the school can't support. There is, at any time, the school has the ability to opt out and not be involved without any further responsibility. If the project does move forward to completion, and we do ultimately have the blessing of a TIF committee, who then gets votes from the boards of all the municipality and entities that are involved, at that point, if bonds are floated, the school would still have no responsibility. All the school's doing, ultimately, if they agree, is allowing a portion of the taxes that would have been generated, that will be generated, to go towards the bonds.
New taxes.
New taxes. So yes.
So no existing taxpayers are being affected by this. No taxes from any current East Penn taxpayers are going to that project.
That's correct. And if anything, certainly we would propose that the taxes to the general population would increase significantly from the project, even with the TIF. And without the TIF, but for the TIF, they will not.
Let's see, Ms. Sanchez.
Yes, so do I understand correctly then that the authority is the one that's paying off the bonds?
What would happen is if bonds are floated for the project to create construction funding, which is what we would ultimately look for, there would be an annual payment that would need to service those bonds, and they would come from real estate taxes. So the tenants that would operate the shopping center would pay their taxes, whatever they would be, whether there was a TIF or not. But then the assessor's office or the tax collector, frankly, would collect those taxes, and at that point know whatever the percentages of that revenue that's supposed to go towards the bonds would then be paid to the bonds, and the rest would then go to the school and county in this case, as they would otherwise. So the tenants pay the same amount they would always have paid, and the only person that would pay the bond would be the documents when everyone would agree to would spell out exactly how those taxes get applied between the bonds and the taxing authorities. Again, those details would be reviewed in detail by all the folks that would be involved.
Okay, and who bonds up those bonds?
Well, there's a number of ways to do that. The interest rate of the bonds will significantly be affected by who backs them up. They could simply be backed up by the tenants. I mean, the anchor tenants that will be the majority of the income tax of this property are first-class national credit tenants. In addition, we've met with the state. There's a state TIF guarantee program that the Commonwealth has that encourages these programs. And we've met with the folks at the state about that, and there is a TIF guarantee program that could be applicable to the project. In addition, there could be other guarantees that are provided. There's a number of ways to guarantee the bonds. The goal would be to make them as saleable, frankly, as possible, because then the lower interest rate would allow for additional proceeds. But again, regardless of who backs them up, the ultimately, whoever buys those bonds is buying whatever the bond is that is packaged up, and then at that point, they get an interest rate return on their money for the risk that they're taking. And it's our goal to try to minimize that risk, which would obviously lower the interest rate. I hope I answered your question.
Mr. Fonker?
Similar questions. I was just concerned if the project's successful, I understand the financing. What if the project fails and the tenants don't do well? Who pays off the bonds? I guess it's whoever stacked the bonds.
Yes. Now, keep in mind, when the project's built, if one of the stores decides to close, obviously real estate taxes are still set. So one of the things that makes us comfortable even considering this type of structure is that the real estate taxes are obligated to be paid by Target, Costco, Wakefern, which is ShopRite's parent company, which are all they're all credit companies. So the bond folks that would put this together ultimately will look at the credit of the people that are backing up the real estate tax payments and then assess a risk on the bond, just like the school floated bond, frankly. And then it'll be offered for sale in the public market, and the market will determine the rate.
The important point, though, is even if for some reason the Target store weren't successful, or the Costco weren't successful, the stores closed, Target and Costco will own their facilities, and they will be responsible for paying real estate taxes, whether the stores are open or not. In order for them to default on the payment of those taxes, the entire company of Target and Costco would have to liquidate. And we feel that that's extremely unlikely.
Or they'd have to sell their, they sold the property.
If they sold it, someone would still be obligated to pay real estate taxes.
Well, on the first round here, I'll ask a question that's corollary to that. The usual thing when we've seen happening in the recession is these industrial concerns or large retail concerns close up shop, say, or reduce their operations, and then they go in and ask for a assessment appeal to lower the assessment so their taxes go down. What happens in the case where they successfully get one of those appeals?
In the structure of the document will be a requirement that they agree that they will not appeal their taxes below a number that would make the bond payments. So those are some of the details that get worked into this, but that's what happens generally is they agree that because this money is being used for the project, they have to Target, Costco, and the other folks who are as part of the project, and us would have to agree that we would forego any rights of appeal of a tax so that we wouldn't create that issue.
Ms. Sanchez, did you have your hand up again?
Yes, I had, because it's a government money, does the prevailing wage need to be paid?
It does.
So the cost of the whole project or just on the part? I guess you couldn't really split it out. It's the whole project then.
No, you can, the part that the monies go to would certainly need to be used with the prevailing wage. And so, again, it would depend what the funds are specifically used for, but for example, if they were used for traffic improvements, then those improvements would need to be installed using prevailing wages.
With a separate contract just for those improvements.
Mr. Armstrong?
So the question that I have, you said there's a percentage that's fixed by the different taxing bodies. They say, okay, a certain percentage of the new taxes will go towards servicing the bond payments. What if the percentage of the taxes ends up generating a surplus above and beyond what's needed to service those bonds?
Then those tax revenues go to the authority. If this thing moves forward, if the project moves forward and ultimately the TIF committee establishes the contribution of the percentage of taxes from the school and from the county that would go towards the bond, that would be it. So in the future, if taxes are increased, if the millage rate's increased, if additional retail is built on the property, that creates an additional revenue source for real estate taxes, all of that goes to the taxing authorities as they would normally. Only the amount that the TIF committee and then the boards approve goes to the bonds, and everything else thereafter would go then to the tax authorities.
Right. Well, let's say, let's just use some round numbers. Those are easy. Let's say it's $1 million in incremental tax income, and 20% is the number that is agreed by all the bodies. So 20% would be $200,000. What if the actual bond payments are $180,000? What happens to that extra $20,000? Is that returned to the taxing authorities?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Only the amount that's in the service of, and what will happen actually in practice, if we move forward, would be that it'll be open until those details are spelled out. Joe, please.
Basically, the bank is trustee for the bonds, hold that extra money, and if it fills up enough, the bonds will be repaid before the 3-year term comes up. So if there's more money coming in, it'll be held prepaid at that time. And the TIF will end as soon as we have enough money to pay off the debt.
But ultimately, only the money that is needed to service the bonds over whatever term is agreed upon is allowed to be taken from the real estate taxes, and everything thereafter goes to the tax authorities as they would normally in their normal splitting of those taxes.
Is there any current estimate of the amount of the bonds that would, some rough figure of bonds that would be needed to complete this project?
That's a tough question. I guess the reality is that the answer is dependent on the other sources of revenue that we have. We've applied for various grants and other sources of funds. So there's a gap that we've identified, but we don't think that the gap that's going to be requested of the TIF committee is anywhere close to that total number. What we talked about in terms of the dollar amount that we think is at risk here is about $14.5 million. Of that amount, we think less than half is something that we're going to ask the TIF committee to consider. And hopefully, as we hear back from the other grants and the other applications we've made, the number will continue to dwindle. The goal is for the TIF to be the last piece of the puzzle, so that to the extent we're extremely successful in achieving other funds, the TIF would shrink and be only needed to fill the gap that's left. And the timing of it is such that we believe by the time the folks on the TIF committee are established and the TIF committee meets, it's going to be a number of months. During that time, we'll have established more concrete numbers on our side so that that TIF committee will have actual dollars to talk about, and hopefully that gap has shrunk significantly. We generally try to work with conservative numbers and make it larger so that ultimately everyone's happy that it's less than we thought.
So you're currently estimating between $7 and $14 million in rough terms is the range we're looking at.
I think 14 has the total. I think that the amount that we think we need to get from the TIF is less than.
Okay. Are there other questions for the presenters on this floor?
We're not familiar with your company here. Could you briefly describe some of the shopping centers you have developed and currently have?
Sure, and Tim's firm has done, and many as well. The Goldberg Group has been building primarily shopping centers for about 25 years. We're based in Blue Bell, Pennsylvania. We've developed about 6 million square feet of retail, and our clients are generally Target, Costco, Walmart, and the boxes that you're familiar with. We are proud that most of our shopping centers are in local community areas. We work hard with all the stakeholders when we build a project like this. You can imagine the amount of people that want to have input on something this significant and this influential in a neighborhood. So we work with the township, with the county, with the school districts, with the residents to try to identify what it is that everyone's looking for, and ultimately end up with something that is an asset that we feel most people are proud of. We are recently, probably 5-7 years, been working on other types of projects. We've done some residential projects, we've done a condo project. We're about to break ground on a large student housing project at Temple University in actually the next 2 weeks. But primarily what we focus on is shopping center development, like the project we have here today. And in 25 years, we have built 11 of these centers, 11 or 12 of these centers. The most recent and close to here is in Berks County. We built in Exeter Township a shopping center called Exeter Commons that's anchored by Target and Lowe's. And in Hamburg, PA, we did something called Tilden Ridge, which is a Walmart and Lowe's. And generally, I think you'll find, I guess closest to here really is Exeter Township. You'll find that if you speak to the folks in Exeter Township, we're confident they'll tell you that the things that we said that we would do, the promises and commitments we've made, we honor all of them. It's extremely important to us that as we move on to the next project, that those folks can check back and see that we've done what we said we would. So I believe that we'd ask you, we'll give you a list of references that we'd love you to check out, because I believe you'll feel comfortable that what we tell you we can deliver, we will.
I think we look forward to that list of references. Thank you. Mr. Bonner, one more question. Do you have something else you want to say?
I would simply say I would hope that my record as a developer is almost as good as the Goldberg Group.
Mr. Bonner.
Are there restrictions on what the money borrowed or the bond money can be spent on? Is it, for example, restricted to only the remediation remediation efforts, or does that just have to be part of it?
The TIF committee can establish, I mean, generally nobody's looking for us to do the private portions of the project with those funds. So it's generally for infrastructure, remediation, things of that nature. I don't believe it's restricted. Cabela's in Hamburg did a significant TIF 10, 12 years ago, and I believe some of those funds went to the building itself. That's not our goal. We would not look for the funds to do those types of things. It's really for the public improvements, the infrastructure, and things of that nature.
Mr. Earnshaw.
So I guess when this does come back to the board for development, the question will be faced is whether we think that there could be some other development on the property, maybe lesser in scope, that uses a different part of the project that could generate equivalent or superior revenues without our involvement in the TIF, and how likely that is to happen and how soon it would happen. I guess that's so it's more of an opportunity cost that we have to consider, rather than there's essentially no tax dollars currently at risk. It's not like we're tearing down existing facilities that are generating a certain amount of tax revenues that we would lose should the project then fail after the demolition. So I think that I'm looking forward very much to hearing what final proposals do come forward.
Sure, and I would offer that the Diocese of Allentown would likely use a developer in a project of any scale, regardless who's going to come to the conclusion physically of what we said. I'm sure you can build something on that property. What we found, and not having too much detail, but what we found is when we identified the issue, the depths, and the characteristics of what's there, the first thing we did was relocate the buildings. That's actually something that took a number of months for us to work out how to relocate the buildings. But even in doing that, even the parking lot can't be above that. So we're talking about something with relatively no weight, 8 inches of stone in the asphalt. Even that required remediation of the mine wash below it. And there's more extensive remediation needed for the buildings if you move it out of the mine wash area. But even in the mine wash area itself, it was something that needed. So it would be difficult to do enough sensitivity analysis to prove that nothing could be built, but certainly anything of any substance that's going to have any weight to it, we would be comfortable in having experts appear who could explain to you the results of the data that we have and why that would be very limited. And frankly, a number of people have looked at doing just that on the property, and as you see today, it's the way it does.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for your
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have a couple more handouts which I'll pass around.
Why don't you give them to the board secretary?
Very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
On the agenda tonight is a presentation by Mr. Jeremy Vogel, John Kingsley, and Mr. Tim Harrison of the Hamilton Crossing Project.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, members of the board and staff. I'm here. My name is Tim Harrison. I'm a developer from Staten Island, New York, and I've been working on the Hamilton Crossing project in Lower Macungie Township now for about 4 years. I'm very pleased to introduce my partner, Jeremy Vogel, and he's accompanied by Kevin Trapper from the Goldenberg Group of Bluebell, Pennsylvania, my partner and co-developer of the project. Also very pleased to introduce John Kingsley, who is the Vice President of Economic Development and Finance of the Lehigh Valley Economic Development Corporation. John also serves as the staff member of the Lehigh County Industrial Development Authority. The Lehigh County Industrial Development Authority is the manager of the proposed tax increment financing process that we have embarked upon, and would be the administrator of the TIF district were one to be formed. The LCIDA has passed a resolution to support the developer in the exploration of TIF financing, and that's where we are today. We are in an exploratory phase. Also, I want to introduce John Lucius, who is the solicitor of the LCIDA. He's in attendance tonight, as well as Jason Brockman of PFM, who is the financial advisor to the LCIDA on tax increment financing matters, and I understand also a financial advisor to the district. The subject of the presentation tonight is a formal description of the project and the proposed tax increment financing. This is a presentation which is actually required by law that the LCIDA, as manager of the project, make to the board. The step that we would like the board to consider would be the appointment of members to an exploratory committee. And it would really be up to that exploratory committee to determine whether or not to make a recommendation, which then of course would have to come back to the board, on whether tax increment financing were appropriate for this project, and if so, what form it would take, what amounts would be involved. That's long in the future. The only issue tonight is whether or not members should be appointed to the exploratory committee. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the podium over to John Kingsley, representing the LCIDA.
Thanks, Tim. Good evening. What I'm going to do here, and we do have a number of representatives of the Lehigh County Industrial Development Authority here with us as well, that may participate in answering certain questions as we get through the process. But what I want to do is provide you a basic overview of tax increment financing. And following a basic overview of tax increment financing, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jeremy Fogel, who is a representative of the developer, who will walk you through the project. And as Tim mentioned, it is a requirement of the relevant law that we are operating under to do this presentation. We'll talk a little bit about that in the context as well. So without further ado, tax increment financing, what is it? It's an economic development financing tool that's used by industrial development authorities and redevelopment authorities to leverage incremental taxes that would be derived from new development. In essence, we're going to utilize or suggest potentially the utilization of taxes that would be derived from the Hamilton Crossings development. All or a portion could potentially be used to pay down debt service on a loan that would be utilized to pay for certain improvements that are required in the project, and will, in essence, make it possible to undertake the project initially. In many cases, what we're talking about in terms of improvements are publicly owned infrastructure. The Tax Increment Financing Act of 1990 is what we're operating under. It actually permits local industrial development authorities and redevelopment authorities to administer the tax increment financing project and to manage the resulting TIF district. Today in the country, there's only one state in the union that does not have TIF legislation, so this is a well-utilized economic development tool that is used all over the country in all sorts of circumstances. The process generally starts with an economic development organization getting involved in a project that has significant financing gaps but has fairly widespread community support, like Hamilton Crossings. And we're looking at all sorts of potential programs and resources that might be able to come to play. Tax increment financing is not something we generally start with. So in many cases, as I mentioned, the use of the proceeds of tax increment financing generally are going to be used for infrastructure improvements, in most cases mandated public infrastructure. To give you a quick overview of how the process works and where we're starting tonight, we need to make a basic presentation to the taxing bodies outlining the specifics of how tax increment financing works and a little bit of the project that we're looking at working on. In the context of the initial meeting, we're actually going to ask the taxing bodies, and we've already done this with the township, to identify a representative that would serve on the TIF committee. The purpose of the TIF committee is actually to do a number of things. One is to actually explore the potential use of tax increment financing for a given project, but it's also to develop a detailed plan on how that project will be undertaken. And it's going to include everything from an exhaustive overview of the project to a detailed economic feasibility study, as well as an overview of how the increments will be assigned to actually paying down the associated debt service to support the project. assuming a TIF plan is actually developed and it's found that it is reasonably used TIF financing for a project, the TIF committee oversees the development of the TIF plan. And once it's completed, we actually have to take it out to the taxing bodies and ask them to consider opting in or opting out of the plan. In this context, the various taxing bodies are actually going to identify the amount of increment they're going to pledge towards the project, and also identify their support for the actual tax increment financing district. And then finally, when we're done routing the project through the actual taxing bodies, we'll actually have to have the TIF district actually officially created. Generally speaking, it is the township that does this, and we expect that to be the case in this circumstance as well. There are a number of things that I want you to keep in mind when you're considering tax increment financing. First and foremost, each of the taxing bodies does not need to contribute the same portion of the tax increment. You can have each at different levels. There is no absolute rule to this. The one thing that is absolute is that the taxing bodies will retain 100% of their tax base. So what they're currently receiving on the property, you will continue to receive. Once the TIF loan is actually repaid, the TIF district is dissolved and all of the relevant taxes go to the respective taxing bodies according to their rates. And another thing I want you to keep in mind is tax increment financing is not tax abatement. It is not to be confused with LRTA or the Keystone Opportunity Zone programs. The taxes continue to be paid throughout the life of the tax increment financing district, and only the increment can be used to service the associated debt to actually make the improvements. Another thing, the confines of the TIF district are usually identical to the boundaries of the development project, and they're expected to be, in this case, so the only affected taxpayers are the owners of the underlying properties that benefited from the tax increment financing. To give you a very simple idea of how tax increment financing works, we have a basic hypothetical example here. The tax increment financing district in its origin renders taxes of $10,000. At completion of the development, TIF district generates total taxes of $100,000, so your tax increment is $90,000. Let's say, for instance, the taxing bodies agree to allocate 70% of the tax increment to the applicable project. That would leave $63,000 being used to pay debt service on the loan that makes the improvements that we're suggesting. Let's further say there's $500,000 in issuance that's made available through the Industrial Development Authority to fund the improvements in the TIF district. $63,000 would be used to pay that obligation on an annual basis until the loan matures. Taxing bodies will retain $10,000 and 30% of the tax increment, $37,000 versus the original $10,000. This is a pretty good example because in many tax increment financing projects, there is some retention of increment. Not the entirety of the increment is pledged to the project. So a quick overview. Base assessed value set at the time the TIF is actually approved. Those taxes continue to be paid to the taxing bodies. The property development increases the assessed value, and the entire assessed value results in the tax increment. A portion or all of the tax increment is pledged to pay debt service on the loan that is used to make the necessary improvements. At the end, this is something we're going to emphasize, that no full faith and credit guarantee of any of the taxing bodies is going to be utilized. Generally, recourse from the note holders and the bond holders is limited just to the tax increment financing fund, or the incremental taxes that are made available to support the debt. There is no full faith and credit of the underlying taxing bodies, and there will not be in this instance. The TIF legal documents are going to further provide that the assessment for the property cannot be lowered to below a certain floor that is adequate to service debt. And we'll also be looking into a number of potential reinforcement mechanisms that will support the tax increment financing. We're going to look into the neighborhood improvement district use, as well as guarantee programs through the federal and state, through various federal and state organizations. Just to give you an idea of what the neighborhood improvement district is, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but what you can do is create a special assessment district inside of the tax increment financing district. that can be used to assess a specific form of fee on the underlying landowners, which we can utilize to offset any deficit that might exist in the incremental taxes that are available to service the debt through the tax increment financing. This, again, is just specific to the landowners inside of the TIF and would not affect any other adjacent taxpayers. The TIF Guarantee Program is a state program available through the Department of Community and Economic Development and their Commonwealth Financing Authority, which can guarantee up to $5 million of tax increment financing project. And then finally, we're also going to be looking into the potential use of USDA guarantees that could be made available to the for-profit entity in this particular project. At this point, I'm going to hand the presentation over to the Goldenberg Group and to Jeremy Fogel to provide an overview of the project, and then we'll be back to ask for our specific request.
Good evening. My name is Jeremy Fogel. I'm with the Goldenberg Group. We did present a lot of this information to you at a prior meeting, so I'll try to move quickly and over the material that we've already presented to you. The Goldenberg Group has been doing real estate development projects similar to Hamilton Crossing since about 1984, and we've developed 15 projects that are probably comparable to Hamilton Crossings, comprising over 6 million square feet. Every project has presented unique challenges, and projects of this nature generally require collaboration from all the stakeholders involved. In this case, we have a project with lots of support locally and lots of interest from the tenants that would effectively be located there. We have some financial issues that bring us to you tonight. Wanted to bring some examples of some projects that the Goldenberg Group has been involved in. The first one is called the Metroplex in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania. This project we use as an example because it's probably the crown jewel of our portfolio. It's 778,000 square feet of retail at the confluence of the Pennsylvania Turnpike, Northeast Extension, Blue Route, and local roadways, all in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania. It's anchored by Target, Lowe's, and Giant. It's an extremely successful shopping center. Somewhat closer to here, in Berks County and Exeter Township, we developed Exeter Commons. This is a project that did use tax increment financing. The reason being that there was a pre-existing traffic problem along the highway corridor, and in order for us to obtain the necessary approvals from PennDOT, a program was required of about $18 million of roadway improvements. That was a burden that the project simply couldn't bear, and the municipality was supportive of the project, and the township, county, and school all agreed to cooperate in the TIF program. And we'll be able to later present some specifics, but in that case, the amount of tax revenue that was received by all of the municipality and tax receiving agencies was significantly more, even from the onset, than was projected. And when that TIF expires at the end of 20 years, all of the tax revenue, like in any TIF, will then flow to the tax collector. So this is an example where TIF was used successfully to redevelop a property that had sat undeveloped in a township where they were looking to promote development. Sorry, I don't have a better picture of this property, but this is the Tilden Ridge project in Berks County as well, next to the Cabela's store right off of Route 78 and 61. This project we chose because it's an example of how a TIF can be used as a catalyst for other developments. In this case, the project did not have any TIF or public subsidy of any kind, but the Cabela's store, which preceded us, did. The Cabela's store had a TIF help to promote, pay for some of the infrastructure that was required for its development, and the thought was that the township was looking to see additional commercial development fill out what it viewed as this commercial corridor, and it certainly had an impact. Our project was 400,000 square feet, anchored by a Walmart and Lowe's. We can certainly state that that project would never have been considered by those retailers if Cabela's hadn't first landed there and drawn the folks that shop there to the region. So our project, although not going towards the TIF, certainly created additional tax revenues for the township, county, and school. This last project is in West Philadelphia.
It's really an example of a project that was more of a transformative in nature in terms of its location. Demographics are very challenged in this part of Philadelphia, and there was a lot of effort looking to get a food store to come service what was deemed a very significant food desert. In this case, we struggled to get the retailers to come here because there just wasn't enough vision from these retailers to see a good use here. And ultimately, by getting a larger property with all kinds of cooperation from the city and the neighboring properties, we were able to add the Lowe's, and because Lowe's came, the rest of the retailers felt there was enough critical mass. Today, that shopping center is extremely successful and serves a great community of folks who would otherwise be without those goods and services. Hamilton Crossings itself is located at the intersection of the 222 bypass and Crocs Road in Lower Macungie Township. It's a 63-acre parcel, and we are planning on an anchor of Target and the first Costco wholesale club in the Lehigh Valley. In this project, Target and Costco would be owners. I'll show you on the next slide when we get there on the site plan itself, but Target would purchase its land for its parking and building. Costco would do the same, and our development team would own the balance of the property. So we would have an investment in this community by not only our development team, but also from Target and Costco. We are responding to the township's need for a town center retail facility. The folks in Lower Macungie Township have made clear to us that they feel like, although they do have commercial in their township, they are missing a central gathering place and a kind of gateway to their community. And we've been working with them to modify the design that we had originally come up with so that it can accommodate those types of uses. They are pushing, and we are willingly trying to make this property look much like the promenade shops of Saucon Valley, where you'll see an upgraded and enhanced facility. It's not going to be a big box warehouse project. It's going to have upgraded facades architecturally. There's going to be gathering spaces for people that are working and shopping within the community. There's going to be bike and trail paths for people that are using the pedestrian and bike means of transportation, which is extremely significant in that area. And it will be an asset really for the entire community and not just a shopping center. The white area that you see there is the proposed site for Hamilton Crossings. It's the 63-acre parcel between the bypass and Hamilton Boulevard. That is also the parameters that we would suggest that the TIF committee consider for the TIF district itself. We believe that the TIF district should only deal with the shopping center, its owners, and its tenants. No other properties that surround the property would be encumbered by the TIF, would be infected by the TIF. As John Kingsley suggested, what happens here in layman's terms, in our view, is that the tenants still pay their taxes. So the assessor will come out and assess the property as if there was no TIF district. And the tenants will be required to pay their taxes as if there was never a TIF in place. So there is no tax abatement, there's no tax deferral, the tenants pay the taxes. The only thing that happens here that's different is a portion of those taxes, whatever portion, if any, the TIF committee agrees should, would be used to finance loans or bonds. So essentially what we would do is try to borrow money from a bank, finance that loan with some of the proceeds from the real estate taxes, and use those loan proceeds to pay for infrastructure costs and other costs that are saddling the project and preventing us from moving forward. It is a but-for test that needs to be satisfied in order for a TIF to move forward. It's actually called a but-for, and it's important that everyone believe that but for this financing, the project cannot move forward. The reason that we have the support locally is that this is a site that the township is looking to have developed for a long time. It's in the middle of their commercial corridor. It's in the middle of the commercial district of their comprehensive plan, and it's where they intend to have their commercial development. Unfortunately, this site is saddled with a number of major physical issues that require significant remediation. I wouldn't go into them tonight because we talked about them the last time, but there's a significant amount of material that we've referred to as mine wash, and there's a significant amount of traffic improvements that are required for us to accommodate the project so that we create some project where we're not going to create a traffic situation for the neighboring areas. And so to do that, there's an extraordinary amount of cost that's associated. But for us able to solve that economic solution, the project cannot move forward. Right now, the project throws off about $7,000 a year to the school district, and it's owned by the Diocese of Allentown. We envision that that would continue forever, or for an awfully long time, if a commercial project isn't able to move forward. And so we are comfortable suggesting that a TIF be considered because it becomes a win-win. And that's because the current base tax program, the $7,000, would never be impacted. The taxing authorities would continue to collect that base, and that would be not affected in any way. And then of the incremental taxes that the project would generate, which will be significant, it's about 570,000 square foot project that we're contemplating. So there's well more than $1 million of projected revenue on an annual basis from real estate taxes. And we're suggesting a portion of that be used to finance these loans or bonds. The rest of it will become available, so it will be creating an economic generator in terms of tax revenue for the township, school, and county. The township doesn't currently have a real estate tax, but obviously at some point, if that was ever the case, there would be revenue there. In addition, there's obviously other taxes and benefits associated with a project like this in terms of transfer taxes, business privilege taxes, and things of that nature. The jobs that are created created are also extremely significant. Let me get to that. This is a rendering of a view from Crocs Road looking east. You see on the right side a portion of the strip with the restaurant that would have outdoor seating. On the foreground in the back, you see a strip center with Target and some retail next to it. And this is intended to give you some of the feel for the landscaping and architectural upgrades that we envision having associated with the project. This is an overhead view of the site plan. Crocs Road you see down the middle. On the top is the bypass, Route 222 and Hamilton Boulevard to the south. On the far right is the Costco box. The large box in the center is a Target. And then there's a number of other retail stores that we are envisioning complementing the rest of the project. This plan isn't completed. We're still working through permitting and approval with the township, but it gives you a very good feel for what we are working towards. As far as an update on that, we are working through the land development process right now with the township. It's currently zoned to permit this project. The township had approved a number of variances to permit the project some time ago. With the mine wash material that we'd identified, the project was completely redesigned, and that means that we need to go back and ask them to consider the variances again, which we will do. We've also been working with PennDOT. District 5 has been extremely cooperative, working with us and allowing us to look for ways to make sure we don't create a traffic issue. And we are moving well towards the process for highway occupancy permits. And then the other large permit that people are often focused on is the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, or NIPDES. That's really the permit that handles stormwater. As part of this project, one of the other issues the township has locally is flooding. There's about 410,000 acres, 410 acres that are all flowing into the area immediately around this project and the bypass. It creates a significant flooding system, and as part of our project, we will be creating a stormwater system that would not only handle the stormwater from our project, but will deal with the flooding regionally and allow all of the flooding to continue on into a stormwater basin that we will create for the benefit of the region. The cost, details, and reasons for our need to ask for a TIF involve the traffic improvements. There'll be a collector distributor road, which is a major through lane that we'll be building on the bypass. There'll be improvements significant to Hamilton Boulevard and Crocs Road. We will also be building the regional stormwater retention facility I just mentioned. There's also a significant improvement that's required of the public utilities to accommodate a project like this in the area. And then lastly, the mine wash and karst remediation. There is a extremely significant amount of material, and as you see there, the equivalent of it is 50,000 dump trucks, loads full of material. All of this needs to be pulled out of the ground. It needs to be remediated, blended with construction materials like limestone and soil cement, and put back in the ground and compacted so that it can be suitable for development. Right now, that's not possible, and our engineers have confirmed that absent the remediation of this material, really nothing can go on in this site. It's a site that is ideally suited for development given its location, but based on the existing physical conditions, simply cannot. So the remediation of this mine wash is required for anything to happen, this project or anything of any substance. So in terms of an expectation for tax revenue, this is a problem that needs to be dealt with before anything can come from this project in terms of additional tax revenue. That's a map that shows you the site plan with some of the traffic improvements highlighted. Again, if there's any questions or you'd like me to go into specifics, we can outline those improvements for you. This is an area showing north of the bypass some of the flooding that goes on. After just about any significant rainstorm, you find these areas in and around the vicinity of the site, and it's the type of situation that we will remedy with the stormwater basin on a regional capacity that we've talked about. In terms of dollars, you can see there's about $18 million listed there of extraordinary infrastructure and remediation costs. We are not asking that the TIF pay for all of these costs. We are asking that the TIF be considered only as the final stopgap in any shortfall. We have made application for a series of funding sources that would be applicable towards these costs. RACP, the Redevelopment Assistance Capital Program, is something offered by the state that we've made application for. We've been granted a small portion from it, and there's a larger portion still pending. Also associated with the Pennsylvania Economic Growth Initiative, which is now referred to as a PEGI grant. That application continues to be vetted along with a number of others to see if the project will qualify. We believe we'll be successful in obtaining funding from that program. There is also a Industrial Sites for Use program, or ISRP. The program was awarded $1 million grant from that program. It's not very large in the scheme of the total project costs, but it's the maximum that that program provides for. Lastly, we've applied for funds from the Transportation Infrastructure Investment Fund. It's a program that the governor has at his disposal to attempt to utilize PennDOT funding and PennDOT TIF programs for traffic improvements, and we believe that this project is an excellent candidate. Again, when the bypass was developed, we had anticipated that it would be at capacity to handle a project of this size. Unfortunately, it does not, and additional improvements are required for us to be able to move forward. When most folks are thinking about the benefits of a TIF and whether it's warranted or not, they look to see what it can generate in terms of private investment. This project is well over $115 million in total cost. So the amount of public subsidy that would ultimately be available to the project could leverage over $100 million of private investment. There's 570,000 square feet of commercial development. On construction end, we anticipate over 400 construction jobs generated from the project and over 1,000 permanent jobs from this project. There will also be significant one-time and ongoing tax revenue sources. The other benefits beyond having tax revenue would be regional traffic improvements, which would go well beyond the benefit of our project, the regional stormwater detention facility, which also goes well beyond the benefit of our project, and public utility upgrades, which again would be the benefit of everybody in the area. And then finally, the mine wash and remediation of the karst situation in the site. By allowing the funding to go to remediate those issues, it takes a non-productive, non-usable piece of property and allows it to generate funding sources which can partially go towards these bonds or loans and partially go towards the taxing authorities of the township, county, and school. This is a very, very rough overview. We're required to give a projection of timing. Obviously, there are many factors that are involved that would impact our timing. On the township side, if we had to guess what we would think our timing is, we think it's reasonable to suggest that we could get through the design and permitting process in the first quarter of next year with the township. We've been working with them for some time. Again, there's an awful lot left to go, and it would be premature to be absolute in these dates, but we think that's a reasonable expectation. On the TIF, if the TIF committee is formed and the group moves forward, it would be reasonable to assume that they could do their work, and if they were so inclined, move forward with the TIF ordinance shortly after permitting for the project. We would then close on TIF bonds or loans for the project after that, which at this point shows in June of 2013, and commencement of construction would begin immediately. If that was the schedule and we could start in June of 2013, the stores would open in the fall of 2014. We generally, as a company, would seek to have all of our permits and approvals in place in total before we would close on the purchase of the ground. And then once we had all of our permits in place and financing in place, we would close and start construction immediately. I guess just a couple quick highlights. I think from some questions that we had at the township level, it's important to just reiterate that the district would be limited to the shopping center. We would not be impacting other properties. That would have to be confirmed by the TIF committee, but that would be the reasonable thing to do so that no other properties feel that they're being included in the TIF. and be in any way negatively impacted. Excuse me, it really doesn't do anything for those properties because they just pay their taxes they otherwise would, but just in general, people seem to feel a little hesitation at being concluded in the TIF district just because of the unknown. Costco and Target would be owners and would be buying their properties along with us so that we'd have significant investment from serious stakeholders in the project. There will be no township, county, or school liability or taxpayer liability in any way. If we are able to move forward with this project and the TIF committee is so inclined and all the boards approve this and we move forward with TIF bonds and the entire project fell apart for whatever reason, there'd be no liability on the township, county, or school. There's no taxpayer left holding the bag. This would be completely financed with bonds, and the bonds would be not guaranteed by the township, county, or school. The taxes won't go up. The township, the tax assessor assesses the underlying properties as any other property. So we simply would have an increment of taxes based on the fact that today the property sits vacant, is in the clean and green program, and really does nothing other than the diocese has someone farming, I believe, some feed corn on the northern part of the property on the north of the bypass, and by turning it into a commercial shopping center, it creates significant value, and that's what generates the taxes. The tax portion of the stream of money basically is what's present value, if you will, by making a bond or a loan so that we get funds for construction. These funds are used for the things that we identified, traffic improvements and things of that nature. The funds are not used for our parking lots, they're not used for our buildings, they're not going to the private developer. They're simply funding the types of costs that need to be dealt with before a project like this can move forward. Turn it back over to John.
So tonight, we are not asking for the school district to actually approve the tax increment financing. All that we are asking is that you identify or select a representative to serve on the TIF committee, which will explore the potential for using tax increment financing to support Hamilton crossings. And we can actually make this request a number of ways. We can do this in writing. Many of the taxing bodies like to see something in writing. We would be happy to provide you something in writing if you so desire. So however you would like us to submit the request, we're happy to do that. And I guess to close out the presentation, just give you a quick overview of the remaining steps in the tax increment financing process, because we're really at the beginning stages of this, and it's important to understand that the tax increment financing committee is going to really spend a great deal of time going into the depth of whether this actually will be a realistic circumstance to use the program. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to complete initial meetings with the taxing bodies. As Jeremy mentioned, we did meet with the township, and they have selected certain representatives to work with us in the TIF committee. We will have to also meet with the county, which we would be looking to do probably either the 10th or the 24th of October. Assuming that everyone selects a TIF committee representative and we commence meetings of the tax increment financing committee, we would do that next, and we would begin preparing the development plan once the TIF development plan. Once the committee identifies that there is a need here and it makes sense to use the program. We would then take the plan to the Lehigh County Industrial Development Authority for finalization, and then it would be going to the tax increment participating taxing bodies for their opt-in or opt-out. In the context of this, we will also need to get certain certifications from the Township Planning Commission identifying the area as blighted in keeping with the urban redevelopment law, which actually identifies a number of specific definitions to the word blight which apply here. Following that, we would create the TIF district utilizing the township to pass the ordinance or resolution. And then we would begin working with related capital markets or bank entities to originate the tax increment financing loan or bonds. And then following completion of the project, we would actually begin, seeing the tax revenue generated and begin paying down the tax increment financing. So that's an overview of the steps, and that's where we are currently. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, and we certainly would be willing to also meet outside of this forum to answer any questions that you or anyone in the audience may have regarding tax increment financing.
Okay, thank you. I can answer one of your questions. We will require a formal request from you so we can dock it on our next board meeting agenda.
Happy to do that. I'll have you something before the end of the week.
Before we vote on it.
Okay. Very good.
Now, are there questions for any of the gentlemen or their resources on the presentation this forward?
Just a confirmation that the taxes are imposed and collected as per usual by the taxing body.
Correct.
Then if the TIF is agreed upon and the percentage is agreed upon, then that money flows from the taxing body to the Industrial Development Authority.
That's correct.
And then the Industrial Development Authority is responsible for paying the bond.
That's correct.
Mr. Blocker.
I had a question on the timing. The bonds closed in June 2013. When do you anticipate there will be an increment in taxes, or is not open until fall of 2014, and what happens to bond payments in the event?
Keep in mind, we are not, all the schedules can vary.
I understand that, but-
And the Tax Increment Financing Committee is going to help us work through, the timeline on all of this. But assuming that we actually issue bonds in 2013, we obviously aren't going to have the increment necessary to be able to service the debt. So we'll have to time things by utilizing vehicles such as interest capitalization and debt service capitalization, which will fund the debt service in the origin and pay the debt service during the period in which the project is actually being developed.
Any other questions? Mr. Stoltz.
It was my understanding from your presentation last time, and you basically said it again this time, without government assistance, in effect, this project is not feasible. In your mind?
I'm going to let Jeremy answer that
That's
question because certainly you'd be representing the developer. But
Yes, that's correct. Without our ability to use this program, we would not be able to move forward with the project.
And it's also my understanding that the creation of a TIF district requires that you pay prevailing wage on the project.
It would.
Have you factored in how much of a cost increase that will be?
We haven't compared the cost of prevailing wage versus non-prevailing wage, but we've certainly, in our estimation, this cost assumed prevailing wage in our estimations.
Okay. I'll look forward to seeing more on that later. You see, I have kind of an old-fashioned notion that we need to let the free market work. We need to have the government, including school boards, stop meddling in the free market. And to my mind, this is free market winners and losers. For example, giving your project a TIF district.
Point of order, Mr. Ballard. We have not yet had our request to address the board, so we are not entitled to debate the merits or demerits of the proposal. This is, I think, only appropriate for us to ask for information at this point and clarifying questions.
Mr. Stoltz, please save your commentary on that subject, I guess, for the actual approval of the representative for the TIF committee.
Fair enough. And I mean no disrespect, but I very strongly don't believe so. I look forward to sharing the book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Ms. Hyde.
Just one quick one. How many members are in the exploratory committee?
I don't know if it matters. Generally, it's one or two from each board. The township appointed one of their commissioners and their township manager.
So one or two?
One or two is generally acceptable.
technically, what is the new representative that he is suggest?
Ms. Dodges.
And the meetings are held of the committee that does get formed? Are they public meetings?
There'll be as many meetings as that group decides it needs to become familiar and comfortable. What they do when they're finished is come back and make a recommendation. So all of the meetings where they make recommendations back to the boards are all public meetings.
But the individual meetings of the committee to form those recommendations are not public meetings.
That's correct, that's correct. But what they're doing is they're working to form a recommendation, so no action's actually being taken outside of the public's review.
Any other questions? Thank you, gentlemen. We'll look forward to receiving your letters.
Thank you.